I want you to spend 2 minutes thinking about these two things and see how they are similar to each other and how they are different from each other. So just take a look at the smartphone and the feature phone, and you remember the class diagram. This is the name of the class. These are the attributes of the class. These are the methods inside of the class, including the constructors, and of course, the plus and minus signs are basically showing whether they are public or private attributes or behaviors. So the plus means public and minus means private. So just take a look at this. I'm going to let you have 2 minutes while talking about this. So I'll let you spend 2 minutes on this and see if you can find out what is common between these two and what is not. So I hope you are seeing this. I hope you're seeing this. So you see that the brand, price, and camera will be common features between the smartphone and feature phone in terms of the attributes. And in terms of the behavior, the buy and return will be the common ones, and the insure and exchange will be the ones that are different. You will also definitely notice that the constructors are different because the constructors are dependent on the bunch of attributes that are going to be a part of this. So I hope you are able to see. In the next slide, you should be able to see these common things and the differences highlighted. So the common things are shown in red, and the differences are shown in black. So can you please take a look at this, and I hope you understand. So you are seeing that these both things are having in common are in red, and the ones that are in black are the ones that are not in common. So this is the common behavior and these are the common attributes. The other ones are different. So in mathematics, you remember that we can take out common factor as a part of the equation expression, right? So in a similar way, some parts of the common behavior that are common for both the feature phone and smartphone can be represented like this. So in the previous code, you must have seen that using the diamond representation, we had shown the association between how some things are related to other things. That we have shown how the aggregation works. Now, this is the symbol in the class diagram for showing inheritance. Okay, so we can make these two classes inherit those behavior like this. So take a look at this diagram now. So I'm going to give you 1 minute to take a look at this diagram. So in this diagram, you will see that every feature phone will have a brand, price, and camera and type, and they will have this constructor and this constructor. So only this constructor they will have, and they'll have buy, return, and exchange. So feature phone will have brand, price, camera, type, and it will have init, buy, return, exchange. And of course, the smartphone will have brand, price, camera, OS, RAM, and battery, and smartphone will have this init, this ensure, but also it will have buy and return because these are not overwritten yet. So these are getting inherited from the parent. So now you can see that all the things that are common between a phone, all these phones, which is a feature phone and a smartphone, can be put inside here, and all the ones that are not common to them can be put and defined in their own classes. So this is how inheritance can work by helping you reduce and write all the common code in one place. So I think this is a good clear explanation of what this diagram is. You will see that this diagram is exactly the same one as we have seen in the earlier. You see that this triangle indicates that both of these classes are basically children classes or child classes or subclasses or derived classes of this parent class or superclass or base class. Okay, so when a class inherits from another class, then those classes are said to have an inheritance relationship. So phone and feature phone are said to have an inheritance relationship. Phone and smartphone are said to have an inheritance relationship. The class which is inheriting is called the sub or the child or the derived class, and the class which is getting inherited is called the parent or the super or the base class. We have talked about this. This is called the parent class, or this can be called the parent class or the super class or the base class. And both of these can be called the child or the sub or the derived classes. Inheritance is also called a is a relationship. So when I'm saying an it is an is a relationship, we can say that every feature phone is a smartphone is a phone, and every smartphone is a phone. So that is what the relationship. It is an is a relationship. So in our example, I think this is the example that they're showing. Feature phone is inheriting from phone. Smartphone is also inheriting from phone, uh, and therefore smartphone is a phone and feature phone is a phone. So phone is the parent class and feature phone and smartphone are the derived classes. What is the other name for derived class? Subclass or child class. And what's the opposite of it? Parent class, superclass, or a base class. So this is the parent class and this is the child class. This is a super class and this is the subclass. Or this is the base class and this is the derived class. So this is how we talk about this. This is the above class diagram. This is just an illustration of the inheritance relationship. So all the things, again a quick summary, all the things that are common, the common behaviors can be put inside this phone class, and then all the additional behavior that is going to be different can be done in the children of the phone class. So why do we do this? Because in the real world also we have things like this, right? So in the real world also uh, we have cars, and we have electric cars and diesel cars and petrol cars, and each of these electric cars and petrol cars and diesel cars will have a manual transmission, automatic transmission. So all of these things are sort of, we can model them using inheritance. So if you are wanting to build a car showroom, then if you're wanting to build a car showroom on the web, then you have to use inheritance. If you want to build an e-commerce application, an online shopping application like we are trying now, then also we have to use inheritance. Inheritance will be the one of the most common things that you will be seeing while we are working with anything that is got to do with modeling the real world. So that is about how inheritance works. So let's talk about the main advantages of inheritance. So the three main advantages of inheritance, I think all of them you already understand, but go through them one by one. We can keep the common properties in one place, in a single place. We can keep all the properties in a single place. So if you go back to the previous code, you will see that all the common properties that belong to both the feature phone and the smartphone, we can put them in a single place. And then that's why, thus any changes that need to be made need not be repeated. If all the common code is in one place, if you make changes to the common code, then all the changes will be need to be done in one place only instead of doing it in 10 places. 10, if a class has 10 children, then earlier we had to do it in 10 places, now we need to do it in only one place. Okay. The next point is inheritance encourages code reuse, and thus it helps us to save time. So inheritance helps us to do code reuse by having the code for brand and price and camera and buy and return. All of the code, if you write it once, we don't need to write it for the feature phone separately and smartphone separately. And therefore it encourages us to have code reuse. And then finally, if you want to add a new type of phone later on, we can simply inherit the phone class instead of writing it from scratch. So if you want to have a new phone, for example, in the future, there is a phone, and there are two types of phones that our application is selling, or online web application is selling, feature phone and a smartphone. Let's say it is selling a new type of phone in the future. Maybe we are selling a Linux phone. Maybe we are selling a Linux phone. Okay, in the future, maybe that's a new kind of phone. So let's say we are selling a Linux phone or a flip phone, then all of those features for the brand and price and camera will still be there for that new phone, but for buy and return will be there. But maybe that new phone will have some other properties that are not common with the smartphone and feature phone, but that are common with the phone. Okay, so I hope you understand what is happening here. Then those classes are said to have an inheritance relationship. Okay, it's called a is-a relationship. So this is the quick summary. If you want to add a new type, then we can simply uh, write it as a child of the phone class without writing it from scratch, and all the common behavior will already be there by default. Now, let's take a look at inheritance inside coding. Okay. For now, we're going to create a phone class. This is a simple phone class. Please make sure you're taking a good look at this class, because later on, this is the one example that we'll be using for the next almost 1 hour. Okay. So please take a good look at this code. Yeah. So I think you already understand that the phone here, okay, the phone here is going to be the class, which is going to have all these three attributes. So how many attributes does it have? Three. What are the names of these attributes? Price, brand, and camera. All these three attributes are public. And what are the behaviors that it has? It of course has a constructor which takes four attributes. Apart from itself, it takes three attributes: price, brand, and camera. And of course, it has two methods called buy and return. Now we have a class called feature phone. We have another class called smartphone. And in line number 19, we are basically instantiating a phone object and we are buying the phone object. So let's see if we can run this code. So here we are getting the output. The output is saying that we are buying a phone. So buying a phone is basically the output when somebody calls the buy method. So what gets this is the buy method that is getting called. So that is the output of this result. So I hope this makes sense. So let's take a look at this. For now, we'll just create the phone class, okay, with the necessary attributes and methods, and we'll just create the feature and phone classes without any attributes. I think that's what they did. They created a phone class with attributes and they created a feature phone and a smartphone classes without any attributes. Okay, we will create them later. So we can basically create a phone object and call the buy on it. So now let's go to the next page. Look at this code. What is the change from the previous code? Can you see? From the previous code to now, what is the difference? The difference is very simple. You will see that while creating this class and while creating this class, we have brackets here. We have brackets here. We have brackets here and brackets here. And now we are creating a feature phone object. We're creating a feature phone object and then calling the buy method on the feature phone object. So the feature phone object does not have a buy method, but we are still calling the feature phone object's buy method. And then when you run this code, what does it show? It says buying a phone. Buying a phone is basically the output of the buy method for the phone object, but we are calling the feature phone's buy method. So how is that possible? This is possible. This is possible because of an inheritance relationship. So to create an inheritance relationship between the classes, mention the name of the parent class in brackets. So mention the name of the parent's class. So feature phone, if it's a child class, then phone is the parent class. Okay. So got it. I see that some of the participants have raised your hands. So Vimala has raised your hand and somebody else has raised their hands. So if you have any questions for us, please make sure that you're asking these questions in the Q&A section that we have at the bottom of this chat, please. Okay, so raising your hands, I'll not be able to interrupt this session, but please make sure that you ask your questions in the Q&A section and we should be able to answer them. So let's continue. So let's continue from here. So to create an inheritance relationship, mention the name in brackets. That's it. So feature phone is now inheriting from the phone and smartphone is also inheriting from the phone. And once we instantiate a feature phone, we can access the buy method. The buy method is not a part of the feature phone, but it is inheriting it from its parent. The parent is phone, and therefore, since if the phone has the buy method or any of the parent have the buy method, then they should be able to access the buy method directly from the child class name. So we have instantiated the child class called feature phone, and then we are accessing the buy method on top of it. So let's do a quick recap on what gets inherited. Okay. So, and then once we do a quick recap on what gets inherited, we're going to take a look at what are in the code of what gets inherited. So if you take a look at this code, right, we just did an inheritance to introduction. We talked about what are independent classes, how they are not related to each other. And then we tried to talk about the connecting classes. And now we are talking about what about that's the previous thing that we're talking about was connecting classes. You remember, right? So how to connect them like this? How to connect them using inheritance like this? And then finally, we are talking about inheritance. So we want to talk about what gets inherited. So you should notice that the main point of this slide is this point. So when we have an inheritance relationship, when we have an inheritance relationship, the attributes and behaviors get inherited. Okay, just like a child inherits attributes and behaviors from its parent. So in the real world, you get your attributes and behaviors from your parents, right? So in a similar way, in objects also, the attributes of the child are inherited from the parent. So from a code perspective, right, the child class. So what are the child classes? If you remember, for the phone, we had two children, feature phone and smartphone. Why? Because feature phone, in the brackets they put phone. In here also in the brackets they put phone. So therefore, yeah. So from a code perspective, a child class inherits the constructor, inherits the non-private attributes, and inherits the non-private methods. So these are the three things that a child class inherits. Okay, so we are going to see examples of what is the inheritance, how the inheritance of constructor will happen, how the inheritance of an attribute can happen, and how the inheritance of a method can happen in the following things. So this is about the constructor, this is about the attributes, and this is about the methods. Okay. So once we are going to talk about this, when we say a child class inherits the attributes and methods, we treat the attributes and behaviors as if it's owned by the child class itself, even though it belongs to the parent or the parent's parent or somewhere along the chain. Even then, we say that the attribute that it inherited from the parent, we can access it by directly from the child itself. Okay, so for now it's almost 1:45. We're going to take a break and then we're going to take a look at the examples of what's going to happen here. In the meanwhile, if you have any other doubts, you can always ask in the question answers section. So we have been telling this to you quite often. So feel free to ask questions in the question answer section, and I'll be able to explain everything from the beginning in the code directly for you. I can open an online coding environment and I can explain with an example also. So feel free to ask for the example for the code. Otherwise, you still have a break until 2. So we'll be starting in 1 more minute. So meanwhile, if you have any questions, like we have been asking quite frequently now. So if you have any questions or you want to have some clarifications in some areas, please feel free to ask. So let's start. So what we have learned so far about inheritance is about the parent-child relationship and what gets inherited from the parent to the child. We know that from the code perspective, the constructor gets inherited, the non-private attributes get inherited, and the non-private methods get inherited. We have already seen this in examples, but we will show you specifically how this works. So let's take a look at this code. So if you press this button, it will run the code. Now, continuing with our previous example, since the smartphone class is inheriting the smartphone class is inheriting the phone class, the smartphone class inherits the constructor of the phone class. Okay, so by default, the constructor gets inherited. So Monica, you have raised your hand. I'm happy that you have raised your hand. So please ask the question in the Q&A section so that we can help you out. Okay, so let's continue. So the smartphone class is inheriting from the phone class, and therefore the smartphone class inherits the constructor of the phone class. And that's why while creating the smartphone, we are able to call it with this three parameter constructor. This the number, a string, and a number, which looks like a number, a string, and a number, the price brand, and the camera. So camera must be in pixels, so that's why it's a number. So 13 must be 13 pixels. So that's the example here. So here we have a phone class which has a constructor, and each of these child classes is inheriting the constructor, and the proof of it is in here in line number 20. So once we run the code, it says inside the phone constructor, because while we are creating the smartphone class, even though we are creating the smartphone class, the constructor of the phone gets called, and therefore it says inside the phone constructor. Okay, so please take a look at this code. So I hope you understand what is happening here. Okay. So the constructor gets inherited. That is what we are going to show. What gets inherited? We are showing that the constructor gets inherited. And the next part of the code, what we are trying to do is we have a phone which has its own constructor, and then we have a smartphone which inherits from phone, and it has its own constructor. So somebody has written their own constructor. So once we have their own constructor, we create the smartphone by calling the constructor of the smartphone, which takes two parameters, the OS and the RAM. The OS is Android and the RAM is 2. And then we try to print the OS attribute and we try to print the brand attribute. Why are we printing the brand attribute? The brand attribute is not there in the smartphone definition. It's not there in the smartphone definition, but it inherits from phone, and the phone has a brand attribute, right? So the phone has a brand attribute. So smartphone must is a type of a phone because they have an is a relationship. So smartphone is a phone, so it must be having the brand. So if I run this code, what happens? We have an error. The first statement that gets printed is inside the smartphone constructor. This happens in line number 26. We are creating the smartphone, and therefore it says I'm inside the smartphone constructor. So if we have your own constructor, the parent constructor does not get called. That does not get inherited. Now, what is the next thing? S.os. S.os is set in the constructor, which is being passed as a part of the constructor call. So OS must have been Android, and that's what is being printed here. Android is getting printed. So these two statements are getting printed here. The constructor gets invoked, and then we are accessing this attribute. The third time we are trying to access this attribute, and then we have this runtime exception. We're trying to print s.brand, and it says that smartphone has no attribute called brand. So whenever you're so since the smartphone constructor has its since the smartphone class has its own constructor, the phone class constructor is not inherited. Okay. So if you have your own constructor, then your parent constructor will not be inherited. Hence, hence the attribute in the phone class are also not inherited. So these attributes are going to be created in the parent's constructor, and because the constructor is not parent's constructor is not being called, those attributes are also not present anymore. I hope this makes a little bit of sense. So I will try to show you this code. So take a look at this code and try to see if you can understand what is happening here. So I think you get the point. So here the smartphone class has its own constructor, and therefore it's not invoking the parent constructor, and the parent constructor's attributes are therefore not present in the smartphone. Therefore s dot brand, s dot price, and s dot camera, these are not present inside of the smartphone because the constructor is overridden. So there must be a way for us to overcome this. So we're going to see this later in the super method, but for now we're going to go out and see that how the inheritance occurs. So far we have seen what gets inherited. We are seeing that the constructor gets inherited, and if the constructor does not get inherited, it's only because the child has its own constructor. Now, the other thing that do get inherited are the attributes, right? So we have the same old phone class which has three attributes. We have a private attribute called price, and we have two public attributes called brand and camera. And then we have three methods. One of them is the constructor, and the other two are buy and return phone. So and then the feature phone just inherits, and smartphone inherits, but also adds a new method. But it is trying to access the private variable of its parent. Okay, so a child class cannot directly access the private attributes of the parent class. This is true always. Private variables of any class belong to itself and itself only. It does not belong to the parent, it does not belong to the child, it does not belong to the aggregating class, it does not belong to the composition class, it does not belong to anything else. The private variables belong only to itself, and therefore a child class also cannot access the private attributes of the parent class, and therefore this method will fail. So if I try to run this code now, we're waiting, it says that your code is executing. It's still executing, so let me copy that code and run it on my local environment. So this is the phone class, and this is the smartphone class, which has a check method. The check method is simply printing the self dot underscore underscore price, which is a private attribute of the parent. So the child class is trying to access the private attribute of the parent, and then we are trying to call the check method. So what do? What happens if we run this code now? It says that smartphone object has no attribute price. Did you mean phone price? So what does that mean? So the smartphone object has no attribute called price underscore underscore price because it's a private attribute of the parent, and it does the smartphone did not inherit that attribute, and that's why we have this error. Okay, a child class cannot directly access the private attributes of the parent class. I think this is clear. So we move on to the next one. So we have seen that what gets inherited, the constructor gets inherited, the attributes get inherited, and finally we are going to see how the methods are going to get inherited. So apart from the attributes, the child class inherits the methods of the parents class also. So we notice that the parent class also gives the methods to the child class, but only the non-private ones. Here also it was only supposed to be non-private ones. So here, apart from the attributes, the child class inherits the methods of the parent class. So what are the methods for this phone class? This is the constructor, and how many other methods are there? There are two methods. One is buy and the other is return phone. Both of these are inheriting from the parent class, and then we instantiate a smartphone and then we call the buy method. We've already seen this happen earlier. A smartphone is a phone, and therefore, if a phone has the buy method, the smartphone will also have a buy method, and therefore, s.buy will work, and therefore, s.buy will work. So, if I run this code, let's take a look at this code. And while we are taking a look at it, so I want you to sort of understand and take a look at the entire code. So you'll see that if I call the buy method on this the buy method does not exist on the smartphone, but it exists on the phone class itself, and therefore the buy method will get called and it will print buying a phone. So let's copy this code and let's see if it runs on my local environment control. I'm going to paste that and save it and see if I can run this. And it says inside the phone constructor and it says buying a phone. So this is how the methods get inherited. So you're seeing that this is how the methods get inherited. So inheriting methods is the tryout. And then finally, we are going to see one more example of the code where I'll try to run this code here. So can you see what's happening here? We have this phone, private variable, private attribute and public attributes, public methods, buy and return phone. And then smartphone also is implementing a buy method. Okay, so what does it mean? The smartphone is implementing a buy method, but it also inherited the buy method. So in this case, which one will be run? Which one will run if I'm calling the s.buy? So can you take a look at this code? The phone also has a buy method, and the smartphone inherits from phone and writes the buy method again. So what happens to the buy method? So let's run this code. If I run this code, it says inside the phone constructor, which means, of course, the constructor is getting called from the phone because I did not have my own constructor. So my parents' constructor will be called. And then what does it say? It says s.buy. S.buy says buying a smartphone instead of buying a phone. But if I say S instead of S, if I say F equals to feature phone, and for the feature phone, I think I'll have, let's say, it's only 10,000 rupees, and let's say it is from Nokia, and let's say I have only, let's say, 2 megapixel phone. So let's say I do that, and let's say I do f dot buy also. So the first thing that gets printed will be the two constructors inside the phone constructor. Inside the phone constructor, I'm expecting it to happen two times, and then s will get buy call, and then the f will also get a buy call. So let's see what happens here. So yes, I think rightly like we have expected. In line number 21 and 22, you will see that inside the phone constructor is happening. Inside the phone constructor is happening because the constructor is getting inherited. And then in line number 24 and 25, it says buying a smartphone because S is a smartphone, and it says buying a phone because F is a feature phone and it has not done anything to the buy method. So it's going to use its parents buy method, and the parents buy method is in line number 8 and 9 specifically. So 9, it says buying a phone. So initially, for the first case, it says buying a smartphone, and the output would be buying a phone for the second case. So this is called method overriding. Okay. Sometimes a child may not want to use what it has inherited from the parent. The same holds true for object-oriented programming also. So if the child does not want to use a method inherited from the parent class, then it can create its own method with the same name. So in our case, it was the buy method. It already has a buy method because it inherited it. But now from that, we have overridden and created our own buy method. Okay, so if the child class does not want to use a method inherited from the parent class, then we create its own method with the same name. It can create its own method with the same name. So when the child has a method with the same name as that of the parent, it is said to override. This is called method overriding. It's called method overriding, and method overriding is also called as polymorphism. So please remember this is a keyword and it's a very important point. So we keep using polymorphism in many ways in our programs, especially when we are using multiple inheritance or multi-level inheritance. So let's talk about method overriding once more. So if you take a look at this code, the parent has a buy method, smartphone is a child of the phone, it also has a buy method, and when we call the buy method of the smartphone, the one in the smartphone gets called and not the one of the parent, because this is called method overriding. Method overriding is also called as polymorphism. And then once we talk about method overriding, I think you have seen all the ways in which we are going to be able to implement all the ways in which we are going to uh, uh, inherit all the attributes and constructors and methods. This is how we have seen it. And now the next topic would be the quiz. So please make sure that you are able to answer these quiz questions. There are three questions in 30 minutes. Uh, even if you fail to answer those questions, you will be able to do a re-attempt. Make sure you are able to do the re-attempt and make sure you are trying to do it earlier than later, because as and when you go later, you will have lesser and lesser time to do all these attempts. Now, in the earlier case, we have seen, in the earlier case, we have seen that we were not able to override the constructor. You remember? So let's take a look at this code. Please take a look at this code. I'm going to copy that and paste that code here so that you can see. What is the difference between this code and the previous code? Can you see the difference? What is the difference between this code and the one that we have seen before the quiz? Can you tell me? Can you take a look at this and tell me? Please spend a minute and try to look at this code again, see if you can understand it. So I hope that you have noticed the difference. This is the super function that we are seeing. And you are seeing that the super function can be followed by the by method. So what's happening here is the parent has a by method and the child also has a by method, but the child's by method also calls the super dot by. So I think you already understand. So let's go through this statement and explanation. Even though the child class may override the methods of the parent class, okay, so in here the by method is being overridden by the by method of the child class. So even though the child class may override the methods of the parent class, it might still decide to use the parent class's overridden method. So the child wants to use the parent class method to invoke anything. To invoke anything, remember, to invoke anything belonging to the parent class, the child class needs to use the super function. So the smartphones is a child of the phone class, and super dot by would imply that it would call the by method of the phone class. So what will you have? What will you expect when s dot by will happen? Smartphone dot by will print buying a smartphone, and then we're going to call the by method of its parent, and the by method of it says parent says buying a phone. So let's run this code and see what happens. If it doesn't execute in a little while, I'm going to run it in the other environment. So looks like the execution is taking a little longer because I'm connected to so many hundreds of people. So don't worry. Right now, we're going to take a look at the overridden method. We're going to take a look at the super function here. So let's say we run this code here. You'll see that the execution is quite fast. So what happens in line number 22, it says inside a phone constructor, and just like you expected, when you're calling the buy method, it says buying a smartphone from line number 19, and then it says buying a phone because of line number 9. So to access anything belonging to the parent class, you can use the super function. In fact, you can also access not just the methods of the parent, but also the constructor of the parent. So let's go and go to the next page. So to access the parent constructor or as well, we can use super also. Thus, the data is passed to the child class constructor. The data that is passed to the child class constructor can be sent to the parent class constructor, and therefore the attributes of the parent class can also be inherited. So earlier we saw that whenever we are creating our own constructor, which means we are overriding the parent's constructor, we were losing the attributes. And now we don't need to lose the attribute. Super function can be used to access the constructor or methods of the parent class. Okay, so here this is the constructor of the parent class. And here, this is the constructor of the child class. The smartphone is a child of the phone class. And can you see that we are able to call the init method of the super function. So when we make a call to the super function and then we call init and then we pass on the price, brand, and camera. And what happens when we do that? The constructor of the parent gets invoked and all these attributes are now invoked and therefore they are set. And that is the reason why, the attributes of the parent class also get inherited if we make a call to super. The super function, like we have already seen, it can be used to access the constructor or the methods, but you should remember that we cannot access the attributes. You can access the attributes directly, right? You don't need the super method or you don't need to call the super function to access the attributes. Also, the super function cannot be used outside of a class. It can only be used inside of a class. I think that makes perfect sense because super would imply that I am referring to my parent. It only happens if I am inside of a class and that class is having a parent-child relationship with something else. If there is no inheritance, there is no super. If there is no class, there is no super. So if you see the super keyword outside of a class, then something is wrong. So super function can be used only inside of a class and it cannot be used outside of it. So take a look at this code again. I think this is a better view. The by method will call both of them, right? Now, let's go quickly and go to the next point. We're going to quickly summarize what is inheritance. So a class can inherit from another class. I think this is what we have naturally understood so far. A class can inherit from another class. This is what inheritance means, and therefore a class can inherit the attributes or the constructors or the behaviors of the another class. So that's what is at the next point, the constructor attributes and methods. They are the ones that get inherited to the child class, only the ones that are non-private. They only are the ones that get inherited. If they're private, then they do not get inherited, nor are they accessible. The parent class obviously has no access to the child class. The parent class is just being used by the child class to create itself. It's not that the parent class has any way access to the child class. The child class is a different class altogether. The private properties of a parent are also not accessible directly in the child class. We have already talked about this. The private properties of any class are not accessible anywhere else except inside of that class itself. So private properties are not accessible even to the child classes. A child class can override methods, attributes or methods. And when they are overriding methods, this is called method overriding. And you also know that method overriding, the other word for method overriding is called polymorphism. And finally, super is an inbuilt function. Okay, and this can be used to invoke the parent class methods and constructors, but not the attributes. So what does a class have? A class has a constructor, a class has methods, and a class has attributes. But the only thing that you cannot access is the attributes. You can access all the methods of the parent, and you can access all the constructor of the parent. So once we finish the inheritance summary section, we move on to the quiz. So please make sure that you are able to finish off this quiz. And once you're done with the quiz, you have these exercises on the class diagram, and you have a small exercise on inheritance and another exercise on the class diagram. These are all interactive diagrams. Make sure you finish and make sure you submit them. And then the next topic will be the types of inheritance. But before we go into that, I want to take a small break and I want to tell you about all the doubts that you have. So that is the end of the topics for today's session. Okay, maybe I finish off the next topic also. So, and then once we finish off the topic, we'll have a little bit of time, for the question and answer section. So you can please ask your questions in the Q&A section and we should be happy to answer. So once you finish off all these exercises, the next set of topics will be the inheritance types. So inheritance, it can come in many forms. Okay, so let me expand this a little bit. So you can see that inheritance, it comes in many forms. One is the single level inheritance, the other is the multi-level inheritance, the other is the hierarchical inheritance, and the other is the multiple inheritance. You have already seen some of them. I think you have definitely seen single level inheritance and hierarchical inheritance so far, but you have not seen multi-level inheritance or you have not seen multiple inheritance. So please take a look at these words. This is called multi-level and this is called multiple. It's slightly similar words, but they mean a totally different thing. Okay, so inheritance can come in many forms. It can come in single level, it can come in multi-level, it can come as a hierarchical or multiple or any combination of these. So what is single level inheritance? It is when a single parent has a single child. What is multi-level inheritance? When the one of the children is inheriting from a parent which itself is the child of somebody else. So parent, child, grandchild, that kind of a thing. So single level means the parent does not have any other parent and the child does not have any children. In multi-level, that is not necessarily true. And hierarchical inheritance would be where we have seen this example quite often, where a product is a smartphone is a product and a feature phone is also a product, and therefore we can have something called a hierarchical inheritance, where multiple things inherit from the same thing. You can see this diagram also. This is the diagram. This is sort of a representation of what happens in the class diagram also. And finally, we have a smartphone. A smartphone is a product. A smartphone is also a phone. This is called multiple inheritance, where one child has two parents. Earlier, you saw that one parent has two children. Now we are saying that one child has two parents. This one child has many parents. That is called multiple inheritance. So these are the four kinds of inheritance, and we are going to take a look at this at examples of this code on each of these kinds. So I think you already will find that single level and hierarchical inheritance is something that you have already seen, but we will go through them quickly, and the other two ones will spend a little more time on them. The first one will be the single level inheritance. So let's try that out. So single inheritance enables a derived class or the base class or the subclass to inherit properties and behavior from a single parent class or a superclass or a base class. Okay. So the single inheritance enables somebody to inherit the properties and behavior. Properties and behavior. So observe the output for this code. So we have a phone. It has a constructor and two methods. And within that constructor, we know that it has three attributes. Smartphone inherits from the phone, and we instantiate a smartphone and we call the by method. We have already seen this code and you know exactly what is the output that we can expect from this code. So if I write this code here, you will see that it has a by method and the smartphone, and we're going to call the by method directly. It says I am inside the phone constructor because yes, it is inside the phone constructor, and then it says I'm buying the phone. Yes, so it says I'm buying the phone, and therefore the buy method is getting inherited. This is called single inheritance. Single inheritance. The next one would be called multiple inheritance. Multiple inheritance would mean that at least one child or at least one of these classes is both a parent and a child of somebody, some other class. So we have a product, it doesn't have a parent. We have a phone, the parent of the phone is product, and then we have a smartphone, and the parent of the smartphone is phone. So smartphone's parent is phone, phone's parent is product. Okay, so this is the grandparent, this is the parent, and this is the child. Okay, and then we are going to call the buy method on the smartphone and review method on the smartphone. So smartphone itself does not have its own methods defined, it just inherits everything from phone, which in turn inherits everything from product. And therefore smartphone.buy and smartphone.review. So buy will be getting called from the phone implementation, and review will be getting called from the product implementation. So the code is executing, and while it is executing, we can also try to execute in our environment. So here is the code. We have a product, the phone inherits from the product, and the smartphone inherits from the phone. This one has a buy and return phone, and this one has the review. And we're going to call buy from one of them and review from one of them, and we're going to run this code. So it says inside the phone constructor, it says buying a phone, and it says product customer review. So buy also works and review also works. This is because of multiple inheritance, where buy is inherited from the parent, but review is inherited from the parent's parent. So this is an example of what you are going to see in multiple inheritance. So the next thing, I think this is an example that we have been seeing very often throughout these exercises. This is called hierarchical inheritance, when several classes, more than one class, are derived from a common base class. Okay, this is called hierarchical inheritance. And I think you know this code. We have phone and we have a smartphone and feature phone. Both of them inherit from the phone, and therefore inside the phone we have buy and return phone. We can call the buy method on a smartphone or buy method on a feature phone. We can call the return phone method on the smartphone or return phone method on the feature phone. So we can keep doing that only because of inheritance, and this is what is called as hierarchical inheritance. You have seen this example, we have seen this example so many times. I think this makes perfect sense for you now. So we are going to move ahead to the next topic. I think this is the one that is slightly going to be a little bit different from our natural understanding of inheritance. So if a class is derived from two or more base classes, then it is called multiple inheritance. Okay, it's called multiple inheritance when we have two or more base classes. So let's take a look at the smartphone. This is line number 18. In line number 18, you'll see that smartphone is inheriting both from the phone and the product. And we are going to call the buy and review methods. The buy method is coming from the phone, of course, and the review method is coming from the product. So the smartphone now has all the methods and all the attributes of both of these. Please note that while constructing the smartphone, we are using the one with the three parameters. The product itself does not have its own constructor. We are using the constructor of phone. So let's run this code. So if I run this code, this is what happens. We are constructing the smartphone, and then when we call the buy, it returns whatever is the buy method, and then we do the review. It prints whatever is in the review method. So what did we learn? So we learned that this is what multiple inheritance is. But I'm sure that you already have it out. This one has a constructor, this one does not have a constructor, but we are already using the constructor of the first one. Why are we using the constructor of the first one? That is your correct guess. So try to understand, take a look at this code, and you will see, you will definitely get this doubt. So if both of them have different methods, okay, there is no clashing. But if both of them have the same methods, for example, both of them will definitely have the constructor, then which one will survive? So if a class is derived from two or more base classes, then it's called multiple inheritance. And this is an example of that in code. Okay, so I'm going to copy that and I'm going to paste that here and save it. And if we run the code, you'll see that buying a phone and reviewing a phone. So reviewing a phone comes from here, buying a phone comes from here. So these are all from different parts of the code. So let's continue. One last thing about multiple inheritance. So when a child is inheriting from multiple parents, right, and if there is a common behavior to be inherited, it inherits the method of the parent class first in the list. So same thing here, we have a buy method here and we have a buy method in the product also. Okay, but when we are doing the multiple inheritance, we are getting the product first. So the buy method will be coming from the product and the buy method will not be coming from the phone. Okay, so if I take this code, let's prove that. Definitely, let's try to prove that. If I run the code, we are in line number 21, it says yes inside the smartphone constructor. In line number 23, it says s.buy, and s.buy could either return buying a phone or s.buy should return either buying a product buy method. And what does it do? It says product buy method only because s.buy is coming from the product. Why is it coming from the product? Because in this list, it is coming from the product. So had it been phone and product, had it been phone and product, and if I run this code again, you will see that inside the phone constructor, but this time it is saying I'm buying a phone instead of saying product buy method. Instead of saying product buy method, it says buying a phone. So you see that the order in which we are going to inherit will matter in a multiple inheritance scenario. Only in those cases where we are having a clash between the names. So whenever we are having a clash between the names, the first one will win. Okay. I think the same thing will apply for the constructor also. The constructor of the very first one in the list, the constructor of the product will be. So, okay. So in this case, if it's the product, then that's why we are having three parameters, which is the price, brand, and camera, which is for the phone. Okay. This is for the earlier case, right? So I hope you got it. And then you have this quiz and you have these further assignments before we move on to abstract. Okay, so that is it for today. So that is the end of all the topics that we are supposed to cover. So now we are open to having your question and answers. So please feel free to ask any questions that you have so that we can address them at the appropriate time and in the appropriate way. So we should be able to answer. Until 2:45 we have time to address any questions that you have. So please ask your questions in the Q&A section. Any questions regarding the platform that you have? Any questions? Otherwise, please let us know. We'll tell you whom to contact if you have any problems, etc. etc. Please let us know if you have any other questions so that we should be able to answer them. So we have 2 more minutes. Please feel free to ask any questions. I'll be happy to answer. If you have any doubts, any questions, any queries, or any examples that you want more explanation on, or any doubts that you have, any concepts that you have missed, any other technical query, please feel free to ask. Okay, looks like you have no doubts anymore. So let's continue from here where we left off in the next session. So it's almost 2:45. That finishes off our slot for your queries. So I think I'm done with the session. If you do not have any queries, we can stop this session for now. Braj Mohan, I think we are done with the session. We have opened up for question and answers, but looks like the candidates are not having any queries right at this moment. Okay, so let's finish this session then. Looks like we have no more queries for this day. Okay, so the next session would happen on Friday. This Friday, it will happen for you in the first half. At in the first half. So Tarani, I think that answers your question. Uh, any other questions that you guys have? Yeah, thank you for your question, Tarani. So I hope that answers. And anything else? Okay, so thank you for your time. We can finish this now. So I hope you have a good learning and make sure you finish all your assignments and assessments.